Welcome to the People of AI podcast, showcasing inspiring people with interesting stories in the field of artificial intelligence. I'm Ashley Oldacre. Let's jump right in. This podcast is sponsored by Google. Any remarks made by the speakers are their own and are not endorsed by Google. Hi, everybody. Ashley here.
Hi, I'm Gus.
Gus, I'm super excited to welcome our new guest, Tulsee Doshi, and I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about her. She is the head of product for Google's Responsible AI and Human-Centered Technology organization. In this role, she leads the development of Google-wide improvements, resources, and best practices for developing more inclusive and ethical products. Tulsee has been recognized as one of Forbes 30 Under 30 leaders and one of the top women in AI ethics. Tulsee is a proud Oregonian and a Bollywood fan, and you can often find her choreographing and practicing new semi-classical or Indian folk pieces in her spare time. Welcome, Tulsee.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We're so excited that you're here and honored that you've taken the time. And with all of our guests, we'd love to get to know you a little bit and tell us about where you started and your journey into tech, and take us as far back as you'd like.
Sounds great. So I didn't actually, know where I was trying to go from a perspective of, I've always wanted to be in computer science or always wanted to be an engineer. In fact, I think growing up, thought about, wouldn't it be great to be a librarian, or, should I go into medicine and become a doctor, or, I want to have impact. What does it look like to have that impact? And throughout college, I actually did study computer science, and I actually studied a field called symbolic systems, which was a combination of computer science and psychology and philosophy and linguistics. And part of that was because of wanting to get as much exposure to what are the different kinds of questions or conversations that are out there, and how can I make sure that I'm studying as much of a diversity of perspectives as I can. Didn't really quite know where all of that was going to lead and where all of that was going to land. And it's interesting now, in retrospect, realizing that as a part of that degree, I actually went to Oxford for a quarter to study AI ethics. And at the time, that was a very just like academic interest. It was like, I want to understand kind of how people are talking about this space. How does the science fiction that we read about relate to how we might be building things in real life? And, how does philosophy and technology mix in a meaningful way?
Very cool.
And, fast forward to now, being a product manager at Google and leading our efforts in responsible AI from a product standpoint. It's interesting how these threads tie together, but that definitely was not intentional by any means. I joined Google 8 years ago as a part of the Associate Product Management program. And that's a program for new grads who are interested in product management, and to kind of just like throw you into the deep end and say, we're going to build skills at Google on the ground. And very grateful for the program. It was a great way to learn, a great way to just get exposure and understand what it means to be a product manager. And again, not with a clear perspective of where that was going to translate from a career standpoint, but really interested in making sure that I'm building as much of a diversity of skills as possible. Spent a year as a PM on search, spent 2 years as a PM for the YouTube recommendations system, and then came over to research to work on responsible AI and have been here ever since.
Wow, what a journey. I like that you have taken this perspective from even sort of a younger age of this interdisciplinary approach. Do you find that being a product manager also leverages the fact that this is very sort of an interdisciplinary field? And also, what was that shift for? What was that? I'm guessing after college, that was the APM program is kind of, it takes new grads. So what was your thinking around like, oh yeah, I want to go into product versus tech or computer science, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question. So honestly, the APM program itself and coming into that out of graduation, I think came actually from a place of, okay, I've done some software engineering internships. I don't know if quite that's me, right? It doesn't. And I was looking at my boyfriend, who is now my husband at the time, and he would get so much joy out of working on these software engineering projects and really thinking through some of the complex architectural questions in a way that was just not quite what I was excited about. And I was so much more excited about trying to understand user needs, trying to triage and solve problems in this kind of more organizational way. And was trying to find a way to see how I could leverage that set of skills. And so the APM program was something that I am lucky to have found out about in the way that I was looking for jobs, and was like, hey, this could be a good opportunity for me. Maybe this is something I would enjoy. And I actually did an APM internship this summer before I officially joined Google as a full-time PM. And so for me at the time, it was not necessarily, hey, I really want to be a PM. But I think to your point, really, it was about how can I find a role for myself that allows me to mix my interests, that allows me to still leverage my technical skill set, but also allows me to be really centered in user needs, that allows me to think about the business and the business goals, that allows me to combine kind of different points of view. And I think that really has been emblematic of my PM career, but also just even a day in the life of being a PM, right? Every day looks different. Every day is kind of a different set of conversations with different types of stakeholders, trying to solve different types of problems to unblock our eng teams to make progress, working with legal, working with policy, working with experts in different types of computer science and different types of research, working with our product teams and our research orgs. And so I think for me, I love the fact that I get to, work with people who are just so good at what they do, but in incredibly different fields, and learn and combine those skill sets myself into kind of a combined melting pot. And so, it's like master of everything, master of none kind of middle ground here. But I think it's been an amazing trying to bring together all of those different pieces. And I think of PMs really as bridge builders, right? Ultimately, right. I think we are trying to enable expertise across the company to do what they do best and connect the dots where we can between them.
I also think, and you've worked a lot with product managers as well, and you do a lot of, as developer relations, we also have this very interdisciplinary, cross-functional role. And I'm curious as to how that perspective is implemented when you're actually trying to build out a product as well.
I think it depends really on the product, I will say. But I think what is amazing, the best products, right, are built with a diversity of perspectives and a diversity of experience. And that's because, frankly, you're just going to have more people coming to the table reflecting what users actually need in the real world, because we are not a one-size-fits-all population. And so if you only have one perspective building a product, you're going to come out with a product that has a very universal or a very central point of view as opposed to a universal point of view. And I think that one way you bring that diversity is just by bringing a diversity of expertise and experience to the table, right? So part of that is software engineering, part of that is user research, part of that is design, part of that is policy or legal. And I think it's the job of the PM to look across that diversity of experience and bring the right people to the table and ensure that we are pulling the right pieces of feedback together. And then, of course, you want diversity of experience in so many other ways, whether that is computer science versus other domains, whether that is different demographic backgrounds, right, to actually make sure that you're building a product that is holistic. And I really do see it as the role of the PM to set up the product to be able to thrive on that kind of experience and expertise.
Right. And you're kind of also looking at sort of, you're going wide and deep often, right? Thinking about the user, the broader user, the different kinds of users, to like the
I need to get this thing out the door tomorrow.
And on a timeline too. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, hi. And
hello.
And one thing that, first of all, great journey. When did you decide that AI was the thing you wanted to do? When was because you did computer science, you were a PM, and did you learn already machine learning or artificial intelligence when you were in college, or was something that you start to see here when you got to Google and said, oh, this is cool? How was this transition, or how did you choose it?
It's a good question. So I did take some AI classes in college and did have some initial kind of base expertise and insight, but obviously very focused on more academic learning. When I got to Google, I was in this unique time of coming to Google where we were just starting to talk about being an AI-first company, and we're just starting to really pull in AI as a big part of our conversations and mandate. And so in many ways, when I actually chose to work on YouTube recommendations, a big goal and a part of that was to say, hey, what is something that Google is unique at, that Google does really well compared to the rest of the industry or the rest of the world? And AI was one of those areas where I was like, if I'm only going to be at Google for a few years, and at the time I, would not have guessed that I would be talking to you 8 years later, I was like, what do I really want to learn at Google? And where can I learn something at Google that I probably can't learn anywhere else. And it felt like something like YouTube recommendations or like Google's ability to use AI in these billion user products was like really the unique sweet spot. And so it was amazing that they had an opportunity and a role and to be the PM for, the YouTube homepage and a number of issues we were seeing on that homepage. I just jumped in and I think have never looked back since, in the sense that I loved that role. Not just because the people were amazing, which was great, but also because the way we were addressing problems was so different, right? When I was working on search and I was working on the one boxes, the boxes at the top of the page, if you ask like, who is Harry Potter, you see like, a panel about Harry Potter. And that was interesting work, but it was a very stable experience. Every user would see the exact same thing. And so you were kind of trying to figure out what is an overall experience that we can then ship to every user. And what was so fascinating to me about working on YouTube recommendations is every day, every user saw something different. And in fact, a single user sees a different product experience between minute 1 and minute 2, right? Like if I go to YouTube right now, I see a set of recommendations. When I go to YouTube at the end of the day, I'll see a different set of recommendations. Right. And so you actually are talking about an experience that is constantly changing and that is constantly being personalized to each individual user, right? Like you, Gus, and I are going to see 2 different experiences and have 2 different reactions to the page. And so when you're thinking about building a product using AI and building a personalized experience, you actually need to think about, well, how do we build a product in such a way that it actually works differently for every user, but still well for every user? And how do we build insight and gain insight into what's working for those users and what's not working for them? There was so much data analysis involved to try and understand the variance and the consistency. And it just was so fascinating to me that we could build an experience like that. And then to think about both what are the opportunities for users and then what are the risks and the harms. And that's kind of what's really brought me down a lot more of the responsible AI path in terms of how can we really maximize opportunity for every user.
When you're talking about personalizing experiences, your job as a product manager, I feel like gets that much more complex.
Yeah, because you're talking about not even just one type of user, right? You're talking about such a diversity of users. And we do that in our products all the time. We are working on for billions of users always. But I think it's a very different experience when you know every user is seeing something different. And how do you account for that as well?
It's just that it's fascinating what you said. You worked on search and YouTube, which are billion people using at the same time. I imagine, and you also mentioned about AI, machine learning, and one thing that people have it's hard to put machine learning in production. But Tulsee put for billions of users machine learning in production. So I imagine how challenging that would be. And that's great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's sort of backtrack and maybe if you can tell us the history and the evolution of how responsible AI came up and what was sort of the before and the after. Was there a big shift moment where, and I feel like there was, at one point, Google put out these AI principles, but I'd love for you in your journey to sort of, I'm sure it wasn't just we need, AI, responsible AI principles one day. What was the evolution of that for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I want to start by acknowledging, too, the fact that there are researchers who have been studying responsible AI for years. And years before even it became a set of AI principles at Google. And, there have been researchers across the industry who have been pushing kind of grassroots movements to say, hey, we need to be thinking about AI ethics. We need to be thinking about responsibility. We need to be thinking about these concerns, including at Google. We had researchers kind of driving that work. I think where there is often a gap is between the how do you translate the research to the product. And so for me, the kind of transition moment was I was working at YouTube and we heard concerns from our creator communities, from our LGBTQ creator communities in particular, about whether or not the product was really working for them and whether it was working for them in a way that was inclusive and equitable. And I think for me, it was this moment of, wow, I thought I was building a product really intentionally for everyone, but there are ways in which I could be thinking I'm doing that, but not actually doing that in practice, right? And how do I make sure that we're being proactive in thinking about that and we're making sure that we're proactively centering, a diversity of communities and voices in the way that we're building? And so, we started an ML fairness effort at YouTube, a proactive one. And we started saying, okay, how do we really think about when we're building our AI-based systems that we're really focusing on issues of fairness and inclusion as we're building? And I think it was amazing to see how much the leadership at YouTube was not only receptive to this, but encouraging of this. And we built out an entire program that now YouTube is probably industry leading on in terms of the fairness and inclusion work that is being driven there. But I also started to have conversations with researchers across the company and started to realize that there was so much work that was happening in thinking about responsible AI and AI ethics that we weren't, figuring out how to translate that bridge between the research and the product. And so that's really where I started to say, okay, maybe that could be my role, is to how do we drive that work and kind of build a holistic story around how we drive responsible AI.
The interdisciplinary of connecting the dots.
Connecting the dots.
Yes.
And I think for me, that was my journey. But, there's a little bit of like right place, right time, I think, in my story in particular, in that around the same time as I was exploring these conversations about responsible AI in YouTube and my own role and what I could do to sort of support this space, was also the time in which the industry was starting to talk about AI ethics. And there was a conversation about, what kinds of technology should Google be building or other companies be building, and what does that mean? And so at the same time, there was a set of leaders at Google who were saying we should publish a set of AI principles, and we should be one of the first companies to put a stake in the ground and say, hey, AI has a lot of opportunity. It also has a lot of risk. And how do we build in a way that is truly good for our users? And so we put out the AI principles in 2018. And I think for me, it was an amazing coming together of Google to really behind this mission and this mandate. And so at that time, I came over to research. We had a very small team at the time. It was very scrappy. I think there were really like 4 of us full time working on responsible AI when I first joined. To try and say, hey, how do we build this up as a mandate to the company? And I remember at the time I'd come over, and Christine Robson, who is a product leader here at Google, she said, okay, well, put together a job description. Like, what is it that we're going to do here, right? And I put together a job description of what I thought I was going to do, and I shared that with her, and she was like, okay, let's do this, right? Like, let's make this happen. And so, again, like a lot of gratitude, I think, to the leaders at YouTube and within research and within global affairs that we're driving for the AI principles to create an ecosystem in which this work could grow and thrive and become the org it is now.
Since you're talking about responsible AI, what do you see in... we have responsible AI now, but if we think in terms of software, a database could also bring bias, right? If you have a database for credit score, there's a lot of bias possibilities there. And that's not something that was mentioned maybe in the past, like when databases were invented or even way years later. And this is something that as a computer scientist, I've come to learn here. When you did the AI principle, I said, oh, that's interesting. That's a very good thing. That's a very good idea. But why do you think that wasn't mentioned, or it was mentioned but didn't have too much light on it? How do you see that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's 2 things, right? One is I like to think that the AI principles and the work that we're doing on responsible AI is a learning from histories of us not having these conversations, right? So an example that I often give when I speak externally is around seatbelts and the development of seatbelts in cars, which, seatbelts are a safety mechanism. They are a product we developed to keep people safe. But actually, until about 2011, women were actually 47% more likely to be severely injured in an accident. And that's simply because when we were testing cars and the way that we were testing the seatbelt, we weren't actually testing for a diversity of body types. And so this is one of those cases where there wasn't malintent, right? There wasn't a desire to create a differential experience, but the choices that we made around how we were testing and how we were evaluating led to a population being left out of the conversation and created adverse effects as a result of that. And so really when we're talking about responsible AI, I think we're talking about learning from all of these experiences that we've had in developing products over the years and saying, well, how do we make sure that when we're building AI-based products, because AI can have the scale that it has, how do we make sure we're doing that with inclusion and safety and all these considerations in mind to make sure AI works for everyone? So, Gus, to your point, issues of inclusion or responsibility are true in all of our products. I think that with AI, we've seen some of these things happen in other products and in other contexts, and we're saying, hey, we're now building a new technology that has a lot of potential, but has a lot of ability to amplify harm. right? And I think what is unique about AI compared to maybe other products that we build is that we're going to be building at a very, very large scale. We're going to be building for users across the globe. We're going to be building in ways that can really amplify these concerns if we don't think about them really intentionally. We have the ability to create use cases super quickly, right? And that has the ability to amplify harm. So I don't think it's actually to say that this is unique to AI and these problems don't exist elsewhere, but it's to say, hey, these problems do exist with AI and we need to think about them. And there is also broader efforts we have, even at Google, right? We have a broader product inclusion effort, for example, that is working across our products, not just in AI contexts, to think about what inclusion should mean. And we need to continue to have that happen. But I think also with AI, there's so much novelty.
Right.
There's so much that we don't yet know that needs research, that having a unique and dedicated effort to it, I think really allows us to have that focus.
And as you said, there's so much innovation that I guess I'm going to turn the statement into a question is, do you feel like there's risk in innovation? Because I don't know if it is possible. I think you were talking about taking a proactive approach in terms of thinking about products, but is that realistic? Is it realistic to say we're going to cover all of our bases before releasing a product? Or is there some level of like, we've done everything we can with the knowledge that we have, let's put it out there and see what happens? Because I feel like some of the big stories that we have heard around responsibility or sort of product mishaps has been like, I don't think anybody was mischievously like designing the product to create the
bad outcome.
The bad outcome. And I think what's really great is that we've learned from it and we're incorporating it. But coming back to the question of like how, because this is so new, how realistic is it to really be able to mitigate any of these like negative outcomes?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think, so to your initial point, I will say like, we're always going to learn from how users engage with our products. And there are always going to be responsibility considerations that we maybe didn't think about proactively that are going to emerge from how users use our technology. Because also how users use our technology always surprises us, right? We launch something and then people find new use cases from it or find innovative ways of doing things. And also the industry changes based on how other people in the industry launch things. And so I do think there is a consistent feedback loop we need to create with our users and with our communities to understand how the technology is being used and to learn from things that are in the wild. And so we also need to make sure that we always have the right feedback loops, the right kind of learning from what's happening on the ground and the right intentionality there. I think there's no way to not do that.
Right.
But I also think we can be proactive about articulating and doing the research of the kinds of risks that could exist and really being intentional about measuring for them and trying to address them as much as possible. And I think a lot of that is about being intentional at every phase of the design process. So from data collection to model training to eval, and really making sure that we are doing our level best to understand the considerations. And a lot of this is also pulling in, again, to thread that same diversity of expertise comment,
right.
Pulling in expertise from, sociology and anthropology. And we have a number of amazing socio-technical researchers here at Google who really help us understand what these risks can look like and what we should be expecting downstream from users. So I do think, yes, there are going to be unknown unknowns, and we need to make sure that we are better able to catch them. But I also think we should be holding ourselves accountable to making sure that at least the things we know, we are doing well, and that we are trying to know as much as we can up front.
I think it also speaks to, I think that's a challenge for any product manager, right? Any product, whether it's AI or not, sort of releasing it into the wild. I think it's a consideration. So, thanks for that. Thanks for that answer.
I would ask. She's the expert. So my view on responsible AI, one of the views I have is I see that as the security people when you build a new software, right? So you have the security team that will evaluate your software, but you are mainly trying to protect your users, right? Whatever your software is doing, you're trying to protect users so it's not a vector for a problem for them, right? A bank system or something like that. Would you say that responsible AI is something related to that in terms of we're trying to protect our users from bad outcomes for anything. So we have, it's of course it's different from security, but it's also another concern that we have to look into the software and say, okay, we need to improve here and there to protect our users, let's say.
Yeah. Ultimately, responsible AI is about our users, and ultimately it is about trust, right? So I think we may do responsible AI in different ways across different teams and different contexts, but ultimately I think about responsible AI as how do we build the most trustworthy experiences for our users. And that includes building experiences that are inclusive and that work for everyone. That includes building experiences that are safe and that prevent harm. That includes building experiences that have privacy and security considerations embedded. It's experiences that provide the right context and transparency and controls to our users. All of those things come into play into this kind of common question of responsible AI. And so ultimately, I think about responsible AI as for any user who is going to use a particular product or experience, how can we make sure that they can come to that experience with full trust, right? I think about it as like when I walk into my house, I'm not worried that the house is going to fall down, right? I have some like general trust that what I am engaging in is going to be a safe experience for me, right? How do we ensure that for users, every time they engage with the technology that we're providing them, they also feel like that experience is working for them, right? And similar to a house, we may need to build ramps to make sure that the house is accessible. We may need to think about different considerations for left-handed people or right-handed people. I think we also need to, as we're building technology, make sure that our technology works for every single user who is using that technology, regardless of what background they're coming from or what perspective they're coming from. And we need to make sure that it works in a way that is safe and effective.
Plug to getting all kinds of people in the industry. I think it helps also to have a team of people who bring those different perspectives as well. So we need more of you into the field.
Yay!
Definitely. I'm curious because I've been thinking a lot about responsible AI, kind of as I mentioned before, as this concept, as these principles, which I feel like are something that it's a concept that should be embedded in it. I feel like it's not like you have a product and you have the one sort of responsible AI person kind of advising. I feel like it is also a mindset that if everybody can try to be putting on that thinking cap or that lens, I think it will also help things and might also make your job a little bit easier too.
Yeah.
And so I'd love for you to speak to that a little bit too. But also, I'm curious about the process of applying these principles, right? Are you thinking about it in the conception phase of a product? Are you implementing it at different checkpoints when, as you said, you're sort of looking at the data, you're training the model, and then you're deploying it? There are products like fairness indicators or model transparency measurements to code into the model to also ensure that this trust is there. I'd love for you to sort of and break it down in a way that, from a product perspective, talking about both the principle side of it as well as the product side of it, and kind of where that fits in the
life cycle.
In the life cycle,
yeah,
exactly.
I mean, so I'll start by just saying, like, I think our team jokes sometimes that success for the team would be working the team out of a job, right? Because success for the team would be that everybody is, thinking so deeply about responsible AI and driving the work so intentionally in their products that, like, you don't actually need a central team to be doing this work because it is so embedded. I think that's the world we're trying to work towards, right? I think we're trying to work towards a world where every product manager and every engineer feels like they have the tools, the resources, and the intuition to drive thinking about responsibility in their products. But I think we're still so early in the AI space, and the AI space is changing so regularly, especially in the last year. And there's so much still that we need to establish our Google-wide kind of stance and approach to. And I think it's helpful for there to be a center where teams who are thinking about responsibility concerns can come and ask for help. Ultimately, at a scale of a Google-wide company, it is always the responsibility of the PM and the leaders of a given product to think about what responsibility means for that product. And I think about my team as being the support function to that, right? Providing the tools and the resources, the vocabulary to make that easier for individuals who are trying to do the right thing in their products. And I think one thing I have been really impressed about with Google and part of, why 8 years later I'm still excited about the work here is because I do see that intentionality. I think our products do want to do the right thing. I think sometimes it's easy to focus on, an MVP and then not think about what are the impacts it might have on other users, or to focus on a specific set of metrics and not realize what those metrics might be leaving out. And so part of our job is to say, how do we make sure that we make it possible and easier and more natural for you to be, taking all of the right steps as you're building in the right way, and then creating the right education and awareness, because I think that's a big part of it. And that goes back into even what are you learning in college and, how are you learning how to build products? I think we need to start embedding this kind of throughout. But then I think to your second point, which is like the life cycle, I think what we are trying to do is every time we kind of see a best practice or understand kind of, hey, this is something that we probably should be codifying more into the product development process, trying to turn that into written kind of smart practices that teams can use, but also tools that teams can just embed into the workflows, right? So, fairness indicators is a great example of a tool that we've actually open sourced that we also particularly built in context of TensorFlow, so that if you're using TensorFlow, it actually shouldn't be hard for you to use fairness indicators. It should fit into your workflow. It should be possible for you to ask these questions around how can I evaluate my product for fairness considerations. And so really the goal is, how do we build in these considerations the same way that you always think about quality or accuracy or precision or recall? You should also be asking questions about safety and inclusion, and where we can kind of build that into the workflow for teams, I think is really great.
Real quick, what are fairness indicators?
Oh, great question. So we actually have and plug for this, a Responsible AI Toolkit that is part of the TensorFlow offering that we have both internally for our teams, but also externally in open source. Fairness indicators is one of the tools as a part of that toolkit, and it's essentially a way for you to evaluate a model for whether or not it has similar performance across different slices. So you can, for example, say, hey, here are some slices I'm concerned about. Maybe it's demographic slices and how well my product is working for different users. Maybe it's also slices of how my product is working in different countries or for different languages. And so you can actually more easily slice and dice and kind of see how your product is performing. And that actually allows you to get a better sense of where there might be gaps in the experience for certain users.
But that's once the product is out.
Or just even once you've trained an initial model, right? So you can just include that as a part of the same way that you might look at like precision and accuracy metrics when you're training a model. You can look at fairness metrics, and that actually just allows you to kind of calibrate accordingly as you're developing and building, so that hopefully once the product goes live, you have some kind of initial sense of what that looks like, and then you can continue to iterate once you get real data from users.
You mentioned something that we in Google pay attention to that, and of course we do. We are always paying attention. But this is more a personal question. How do you feel when someone finds something like, oh, this query on Google searches bring this bad result, and people say, yeah, Google is not doing their job, and then every time I see that, I think, come on, guys, you have no idea how much work people put on this, but you cannot predict everything in the planet. Come on, this was one detail. How do you feel when you? Because I imagine it feels similar. Like, come on, guys.
It really does bring up a question of what does it mean to build a really good experience, right? And how do we make sure that we're really doing that in the right way? And I think I expect that as our products evolve and as our users evolve, we are going to see queries that we never thought about, right? And we're going to see people creating content that we never thought about. And we're going to see people trying things that introduce risk of harm or introduce harm in real ways. And so I think we need to be humble about the fact that this is an evolving ecosystem, and that we need to be proactive about improving our products as much as possible. But we also need to be, as we design these products, aware of the fact that the community and society and industry is evolving. And as it is, we need to be agile and kind of proactive in the way that we're driving the work. So yeah, I think yes, it is definitely we're working so hard on this, we're doing this work. I will say one thing that, I do remind my team is that people outside of Google don't know that there are people inside of Google who are trying every day to work on this and make it better. They're looking at a product and they're expecting, rightly so, a certain experience from the product. And it's our job inside to make it the best possible product for them. And we need to know for ourselves that we are working on this space and feel confident about the work that we're doing and the priorities that we're putting forward. Because ultimately it is it's always going to be a give and take, and there is going to be feedback we get that's incredibly positive. And we do get that from users too, right? I think all of the work we did with Real Tone and the Monk skin tone scale to make an incredible pixel camera, I'm really proud of all of that work.
What is that? Tell us quickly what that is.
Yeah, so we, and this is credit to the Pixel team and to a number of amazing folks in the marketing organization and across Google and in our research teams. Pixel, was really focused on how do we make a really good camera, and cameras have had biases for years in the ways that they've been built and designed. And so we thought, well, what would it look like if we could leverage our work in building a good camera to build actually a truly inclusive camera that truly works for a diversity of skin tones? And so the team worked with a set of experts, a set of photography experts across the industry to really understand what it means to take good pictures across skin tones and to build in those insights into the camera. We then said, how do we actually think about this as we're building AI systems too? And we actually worked with Professor Alice Monk from Harvard to actually develop to leverage his research to develop a scale called the Monk skin tone scale, and actually use that to evaluate our machine learning based, imagery products and to improve them to make sure they work for a diversity of skin tones. And that's the kind of work where we're really proud of the work. We're also hearing positive feedback from our users about the impact of that work. And so I think it's always important to remember that if you're doing work that meets users' needs, users will tell you that, and they will respond with positivity. If you do work that improves things and is incrementally progressive, you'll hear that from the users, and you'll hear that in a decrease of negative impact or negative feedback or an increase in positive feedback. And where there are gaps, you will also hear that from users, and it's a consistently evolving space that we need to continue to improve.
Thanks for that. Speaking of evolving spaces, Gus, let's
talk
the famous big shift question that we ask all of our guests.
This season, second season of People of AI, we are talking a lot about generative AI. Of course, makes sense, right? And last year, things changed. Let's say like that. If you're working on AI, something changed last year, right?
Absolutely.
And I had my day of, oh my God, what's happening? And I imagine which was your day, but I would love to know when was that you said, oh my God, this changes everything. I would like to know, how did you feel? Because when we were discussing, who should we invite to the podcast, and I said, maybe we should talk to Tulsee. And when I knew you were coming, I said, oh my God, I need to know how she felt when a specific thing happened that you might know exactly what I'm talking about, but I'll explain later if you want. So how was it for you? How did you feel the change? How did it impact you?
I mean, every day I'm still like, whoa, what is happening? I'm still living that life. I think, so you're right. This last year has been a really fascinating year. And in some ways, so much has changed. In other ways, it is, I think, an amplification of the work that has been happening already, right? And I'll kind of explain what I mean by both of those things. In terms of so much has changed, I think both internally at Google and outside of Google, the conversation about AI has just become richer, right? There's so much more dialogue, awareness, conversation, and especially about responsible AI, right? I would say until last year, responsible AI was kind of moving under the covers a little bit, where there were experts, asking about this space and talking about it, and we had conferences and conversation, but it wasn't in the public consciousness and conversation as much as it has become in the last year. And of course, we're also just building products that can do incredible things. And we were already building that technology. We were already building some of these product experiences, but the acceleration of speed and pace and kind of the step changes that we're seeing are massive. And they introduce massively new responsible AI questions. And so there's also just novelty that's coming into the space that is new here. But in some ways also, I think, we've been building towards these AI experiences for a while. We've had generative AI in the context of like Google Translate and, generating translations for a long time. And so the exciting thing is that we're now able to take a lot of responsible AI work that we were doing in the context of certain products and really rethink how that works in this new paradigm where there is so much being built across the company and across the industry, and where does that need to be augmented and amplified and addressed. And so I think there are days where I'm like, okay, I'm glad we had built so much muscle and so much work before this crazy shift happened in this last year, because, we had some of the bricks in place that we could build on top of. And then there's days where I'm like, oh my God, there is so much happening. How do we keep up with the pace from a responsibility standpoint? And not just keep up with the pace, but almost from a responsibility standpoint, you want to go ahead, right? Because you want to look at where things are coming and think about what the risks to those might be. And then how do you work backwards from that?
First of all, thank you very much for your answer. And do you think that, of course, AI evolved a lot last year, and do you think it pushed responsible AI also to, hey, we have to keep up here because we have the tools and stuff, but now we're facing another completely different problem here?
No, absolutely. I mean, oh my God, right? Like we talk about at Google bold and responsible as kind of our mandate. And I think about responsible as like, how do we innovate in responsibility, right? Ultimately, like, you cannot build bold products if you're not also thinking about and innovating in the responsibility side of the house also. And so, yes, like we've been pushed in a very new way as an organization, I think as a field, to like keep up with the pace and to say, what does responsibility mean in the context of these products, in the context of these systems? And I think that has been a huge growing pain actually for us as a team and as an organization to really like realign to the pace and the speed and the direction of travel and continue to innovate. So yeah, there's a lot of amazing research that is happening in responsibility that continues to need to happen in this space to really meet the moment.
Kind of a hard question, but I feel like there is an assumption that responsibility is an afterthought. And it also might even be perceived as like slowing down the process of release. I guess I'm kind of stealing your question here. But I think speaking to innovation, like, do you feel that, I don't know, I think one of the things that I was even talking to our guest, Joyce Shen, who was on a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about how implementing and thinking about responsibility as you're building out the product actually saves time, and it saves money, and it saves resources because you're already thinking of how to better the product in the moment, right? What we were talking about before, thinking about all these things. But when it comes to innovation, and especially the speed at which we're going, I feel like there's this tension with people, and this isn't, I think, specific to AI. I think this is also kind of across the board, is where's that tension between like, we just got to get stuff out there and we got to like innovate and we got to like, really like, let's just see what happens versus like slowing things down. Or I think there's an assumption sometimes that's perceived that responsible AI does slow things down. And I'd love for you to really debunk that.
I think what Joyce, it sounds like, said when you chatted with her a couple weeks ago is really spot on, right?
Yeah.
Because like, yes, I mean, if I don't put seatbelts into the car today, like I probably will release the car sooner because putting a seatbelt into the car requires me to like, create a seatbelt and go in and strap it in and test it. And, however many hours that takes, like, yeah, I have to do that. Right. But ultimately, if I release a car without the seatbelts, that car is going to get recalled, right? And that car is not going to work for people. People aren't going to buy that car. And also, it'll cost me more money later to go get all of those cars back and strap in a seatbelt later and send them back out into the world, right? And so I think it's really a question of on what time scale are you talking about, pausing innovation or halting innovation or slowing things down? Are you talking about like between today and tomorrow, right? Or are you talking about, in the life cycle of the product that we're trying to create? I do think, it is important that we pursue responsibility throughout the development life cycle, because I think there are small decisions you make throughout the life cycle of the product that don't actually take more time, but do get you to a better outcome, right? So, hey, you're thinking about fine-tuning a model. Well, what data are you using to do that? And how inclusive is that data? And, what safety considerations does that data have? And how are you evaluating it and ensuring that it's right? And ultimately, you might choose to do a few things at that stage when you're thinking about the data that actually help you tons downstream.
Right.
And that actually isn't adding that much because you were thinking about the data anyway, right? And you were collecting it and you were evaluating it. And so I think part of this too is like, the more proactive you are about building in responsible AI from the beginning, and the more we always, when we launch products, go get user feedback. Well, okay, how do we make sure we get user feedback from a diversity of users? And how do we make sure we're getting feedback from expertise internally and externally? Again, we were going to test the product. How do we make sure that we add these attributes to the way that we're testing so that we can get that feedback? Because ultimately, if you think about responsible AI as a completely separate process, like, yeah, it's going to take you time because you're doing it completely separately in a complete vacuum. Right. And now you're adding it on as like, here are the steps for my product. And now I'm like adding 5 more to the other end of it versus no, at every step of the product, I'm going to like add this layer of consideration. That ultimately means that I'm going to still operate in the same, time scale that I was operating before. And there are some cases where we might choose to be slower, right? I think that's the other thing that is worth noting, right? There are cases where we might say, hey, you know what? We as Google or as a product, we are actually going to take a slower push on this because we believe that there is some work we need to do to get this right. And I think that is also okay because it ties to that kind of earlier point of like, we're actually thinking more broadly about what that means for our users. And so being smart about where we think we need to take that more time, where we don't, and how we build into the process, I think all matter.
I would like if Tulsee could give us some... I want to learn more about responsible AI. What would you suggest? That's one. Any kind of resources that you recommend, that would be great, because I think from our listeners or for any ML developer, it's a very important aspect. And we should definitely pay attention.
In terms of resources, so for ML developers, I think definitely would recommend, just plug for our own resources as a starting point, which is, the Responsible AI Toolkit, TensorFlow. We also have the PAIR Guidebook, the People in AI Research Guidebook, which is a really great resource for kind of just starting to understand how to think about developing AI responsibly. What are some of the considerations? How do you think about that as you're starting an early kind of product experience? But the other thing I would say, too, is I think some of the best things that I tell individuals who are starting to work in responsible AI is just go and look at what people are saying about products and what they're saying about AI-based experiences and what they're saying is working for them and not working for them. Because I think sometimes when you talk about things in the abstract, I think we all agree in principle that products should be safe and fair and I've never heard anyone tell me like, I don't want to build an unfair product or I want to build an unsafe product or a not trustworthy product. But I think often, and this goes, Gus, to your example of, the prompts, I think it's hard to see. It's hard to see, like, how is my product going to become unfair? You're like, well, I'm a fair person and I'm trying to build this product and we're going to build it. And I think it's only when you look at examples and you see the impact that those examples have on individuals that you can then look at your own product and say, well, okay, now how do I think about that? Right? And how do I avoid and mitigate those concerns? And so I do think there's a bit of like, just how do we all raise our own collective awareness and how do we continue to build more exposure and experience there?
I had a follow-up question, which was, what advice would you give to someone starting responsible AI? But you already answered, so it's...
Tried to just get ahead of you there, Gus.
Yeah, didn't like that. No, it was a great
Well, that's
answer.
her
Great answer.
role, right? Thinking ahead, right? In all
Oh, there you go.
aspects.
You know.
But I think to summarize, I think having people around you that reflect that diversity in thought, that diversity in life experience is really important. So being surrounded by a team that already has that, I think is one thing. The second sounds like putting on that lens, right? The sort of practicing that awareness of like, okay, I don't want this to be an afterthought. I want this to be embedded and incorporated in my thought process for how to develop a product in machine learning and in a product in AI. And I love all the resources that you shared. I think personally, like I've known you since, the TensorFlow days.
At the beginning of time.
At the beginning, yeah. And I'm so I'm awed and I'm so excited for you and how like in the development and the role that you've played and how you've grown professionally in the company and the impact that you're making. And it's just so cool after I think it's like 5 years, to see how far you've come and the impact that you're really making at such an incredible scale. And it's very inspiring as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that our listeners hear your story, hear the resources, and it sort of inspires them to also, in their own right, to sort of, take a look at how they can incorporate interdisciplinary aspects and also put on this forward-thinking mindset. So
amazing. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. I really appreciate that.
It's awesome to have you. And Gus, as always, your questions are so great.
Great. I learned a lot today.
Thank you so much, Gus.
Oh, of course. I learned a lot today. Thank you very much.
If you would like to learn more about our conversation or our guests, check out the links below. Please subscribe, and if you're feeling extra generous, give us a 5-star rating. We would love to hear from you, so leave us a comment. We'll read everyone. Until next time, thank you for listening.